Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Entry Point Hunting Podcast. I am excited today to introduce you to James Littley. James is the Deputy Administrator for the Okanagan Basin Water Board. And in that role, he has become an expert on invasive mussels, manages the removal of invasive plants in several Okanagan lakes, and supports projects around wastewater reduction and other water science. James has a master's degree in sustainability planning from UBC Okanagan, and he is pursuing a Master of Public Administration from UVic starting this September. He is born and raised in Kelowna, and James served for 14 years in the Canadian Forces Reserve, where he spent time in the woods with a rifle all the way from Vancouver Island to New Brunswick. He still loves getting out in the woods as an enthusiastic hunter, especially with his two teenage sons. So without further ado, welcome James to the Entry Point Hunting Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Justina.
Nice. So I wanted to ask you, first off, we'll just dive right into it. What is the thing that has you most concerned today from a water perspective?
I think the threat of invasive mussels has to be number one on my list.
Mhm.
These things are, I think most people have heard of invasive mussels, but they don't really fully understand the risk to our water here in the Okanagan,
Yeah.
and to a lot of BC. So they they're just going to fundamentally change the way that our ecosystems function, and they have devastating economic and social impacts as well.
Yeah, I think I heard one of your colleagues say at a presentation that I went to that if you drink water or you pay taxes here in the area, that you should be concerned and paying attention to all of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they've been in Eastern Canada for quite a while now, but they're getting ever closer.
Hmm.
Most recently in Clear Lake in Manitoba, which is almost right on the border with Saskatchewan. And they also had a detection last September, October in Idaho, in part of the Columbia, so in the Snake River that feeds into the Columbia. So they're now kind of in a shared water basin with us.
And so maybe just touch on that and what that actually means for those who live here in BC or even in Alberta. So if they're on the border and down in Idaho, on the border, I guess, of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Idaho, is there a time projection of when that closes in, or what are we looking at?
What we really need to do is, if you're a boat owner, stop at all the inspection stations that you encounter if you're traveling between jurisdictions, and clean, drain, and dry your boat. If you know you've been in mussel-infested water, you should probably keep it out of the lakes for 30 days after you've been in that water as well, after it's clean, drained, and dried. Um, they won't spread naturally distances of thousands of kilometers because there's no way for them to just be carried.
Hmm.
They can spread naturally short distances, certainly within a water body, but it's really boaters that need to take responsibility for the potential of spreading this stuff.
Yeah. And so when you say, clean, drain, dry, yes, that's a norm. Couple of questions that popped to mind out of that. Where are the stations and why 30 days after you've done that? Why are you keeping your boat out of a body of water for 30 days?
Yeah, so the stations are spread out at entry points into the province. I think there are 6 in BC right now that are on the eastern border with Alberta. And of
Hmm.
course, Alberta has some stations coming from Saskatchewan. If you're traveling through the states, of course, you should be asked about your boat when you're going through the border crossing. And there's also stations throughout various states in the Pacific Northwest. And then why 30 days? Well, these things can live out of water in damp conditions, in cool conditions for up to 30 days. Um, if you're
Wow.
carrying a liter of water, so if you haven't drained it and you're carrying a liter of water, that liter of water can have thousands of the larval stage of these mussels as well. So if you don't fully drain your boat in the infested water, like as you leave that lake, you pull your drain plug, when you come and that water exchanges with water here in BC, you could be introducing these species. And it's
Wow.
now the law as of July that you have to pull the drain plug in your boat. And it's
Finally.
the same, yeah, it's the same in Alberta and Saskatchewan and most of the Pacific Northwest states. So you really shouldn't be able to enter BC with a drain plug in. But
Mhm.
if you get caught with that in place now, whether you've left the province or not, you risk getting a fine.
Good, good. At least there's some sort of incentive now, because I mean, it's been a long time coming that BC hasn't had that policy in place. Finally, July 2024, that actually comes into effect. So it's nice to see that, the advocacy work that you guys do at the Okanagan Basin Water Board, BCWF, all these other organizations that are saying, hey, we need some precautionary measures put into place, are actually being heard. So it's nice to see that change can actually be made from the ground up.
For sure. Yep.
And you had mentioned that people that are coming out of infested water need to, pull the plug, drain dry, all that kind of stuff. Are there signs at different lakes that tell you if there is invasive mussels in those waters?
That's
Or
a
how
good
would you know?
question. Yeah, I'm not really sure in any given state or province where the signs would be. I know that the mussels have been in Ontario so long that they don't really even think about them anymore. They're not worried about them spreading because they've already spread through Ontario. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, most of the boats that are being intercepted that have mussel fouling on them are from Ontario that are
Mm.
coming into BC, and we see that consistently year after year. Now Manitoba is going to be a bit more of a source lake
Yeah.
for that. But what we do have is signs at our lakes that remind people to clean, drain, and dry their watercraft. And of course, signs at the highways and the inspection stations. It's also mandatory to stop at these inspection stations. So if you
Yeah.
see one and don't pull over, our fines in BC are in the $400 range, but in Alberta they just went up to $4,200 for
Wow.
failing to stop at an inspection station. So
Wow.
it's going to be expensive to have that bad behavior if you don't want to pull over.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in case people, I'll just share my screen for a second here, in case people are wondering what that actually looks like. I think this is the one. So, I mean, that's not the picture that you use in your presentation, but I think that's pretty accurate. I mean, in Ontario, that's what their beaches look like, right? If they've already been affected by these mussels and invasive species.
That's right. So these mussels, one adult female mussel can produce 1 million eggs in a reproductive cycle, and they can reproduce in warm waters a couple times per year. So exponential doesn't even begin to describe the rate of growth of these things. For zebra mussels, from the first detection to the time when they reach peak populations in a water body, that only averages 2.6 years. And so
Wow.
you can imagine going from like our beautiful water that we have here in the Okanagan, all these beautiful lakes in BC. And if the mussels get in, this summer, then you're looking at 2027, 2028 before we may have conditions like this on our beaches. And
Yeah.
these mussel shells, they're only about the size of your thumbnail, and they're razor sharp. Think
Hmm.
about barnacles, and if you'd want to walk over barnacles with your bare feet, like you can't walk on the beaches in your bare feet anymore. They're
Yeah.
also they're super filter feeders, and they're selective filter feeders, and so they will rob a lot of the nutrients out of the water that would sustain the food that the fish eat. And so you
Mm.
can get these declines in fish populations. I know a lot of your listeners will be fisher
Hmm.
anglers, I should say, anglers,
Yeah.
and they have a number of other devastating effects by super filtering the water. They take a lot of that nutrition and they dump it to the lake bottom, and so it favors kind of what we'd call junk fish more than the native fish, salmonids and
Hmm.
things like that.
Yeah.
Um, and I've kind of lost my train of thought there.
It kind of compounds on that though too, though, right? Because if they're super filtering the water, taking the food, clearing it out, and then things like milfoil end up exacerbatingly dense in those areas, just allowing all of that stuff to grow further, which then of course makes it more difficult for the natural populations to continue to grow in those lakes.
That's right. Yeah, the light factor is a major factor. So it will allow milfoil to grow into deeper water and more dense, and then the mussels will actually grow on the surface area of the plant.
Mm,
So milfoil is one of the things that likes mussels, and the mussels like milfoil. And I mentioned that they're selective filter feeders.
mhm,
So sometimes they can recognize if they're eating something that's toxic, like E.
mm,
coli or botulism, and they can change the chemistry so that it promotes toxic algae blooms and botulism. And so sometimes you'll hear people say, "Oh, we got these in such and such lake, and we had a cabin, and it turned into beautiful crystal clear water." And that can be true for the first couple of years because the populations haven't begun to die off yet. So you
right.
get a few years of really crystal clear water. Often you can see right down to the bottom of the lake, which actually is a reflection of an unhealthy ecosystem. You've basically
Mm,
killed everything in the lake, and
right.
then the first generation begins to die off, and you get, billions or trillions of these mussels, and their biomass starting to rot at the bottom of the lake, consuming oxygen for that decomposition process, and creating these algae blooms. So it's a few years of what seems like it might be good, followed by a never-ending kind of ecological disaster in many cases.
Yeah. Yeah. Crazy. Um, I'll pull up a picture too for people to see what these guys look like as far as size wise. These guys. So yeah, giving people a perspective of those are our native mussels in the bottom, and then just how small those can be. And you said that they attach to milfoil, but they also attach to everything else, right?
That's right. Yeah. So we don't actually have any native mussels in BC that will attach to things. And so
Mm,
if you do see a mussel that's attached, it's an invasive mussel.
mm,
They have these little strings of proteins called byssal threads, and each mussel can produce about 600 of them, and they attach with the strength of a covalent bond. And so even if you were to clean the shells off of a surface, you think about inside your boat motor, or if you've got a retaining wall or your boat hull, even if you clean them off, the proteins will stay on there, and they can continue to trap bacteria and microorganisms that are corrosive to whatever they're attached to. So, your boat props and inside your cooling systems and all that, because the ones we're seeing there are full grown adults, but when they're in their larval stage, they're microscopic. So they can get almost anywhere that
mm.
water can go. And that little stick that has them encrusted is a great example. That probably took, less than 6 months of being in the water, from just being like an empty stick to having that clump of mussels grow on it. Um,
Wow.
I I was down in Lake Mead recently, and they pulled a piece of wire out of the marina there, and it had a clump of mussels on it. And the tour guide who was taking me there, he said, this has only been in the water for about 3 months. So they grow
Wow.
really, really fast, and you can clean your boat and get it serviced and all of that. And if you put it back in the infested water and leave it there, they're going to run through your system and clog everything and do damage.
Yeah, we kind of lost connection there for a second, right when you were saying about the byssal threads, so they can produce 600 of them, and then even if you clean your boats, you're still left with sort of this like almost cemented on stuff to your boat, right?
That's right, and it traps microorganisms and bacteria that are corrosive to the surface that it's attached to.
Mm,
So for retaining walls and things, it'll actually leach the calcium out of the concrete and can cause
oh wow.
damage. They can encrust buoys in the water so thickly and densely that the buoys will sink.
Oh wow.
And I'm not sure if I was connected again when I talked about the damage that they can do to boats.
No,
And
we kind of just caught on as you were saying that they would, be connected into your propeller, and even if you clean your boat and put it back, that it would still get recoated basically.
Yeah, so they will coat the outside of your boat, but they're also microscopic when they're at their larval stage, and so they'll get sucked into every part of your boat that has water in it, and
Mm,
so they can clog up your cooling lines and completely damage your motors.
wow. Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, what is there a way to get rid of them once they're there? Like, do they have a natural predator or anything that eats them?
There are a few species of fish here that'll eat them. Some of the bottom feeders, catfish, things like that, in North America. But in general, like most invasive species, the problem is that they don't have the natural predators, and
Mm,
we don't want to introduce the natural predators.
right. Yeah.
So there, I think where they come from around lakes around the Caspian Sea region, there are about 58 species of fish that eat them.
Mm,
And so when the mussels put out these massive bursts of eggs by the millions, at the beginning of their spawning cycle, the fish will consume a lot of those. But here we just don't have those predators, and so there's nothing to keep their populations in check.
mm,
And they have a really high survival rate for such a small species. So you get about a million eggs per female mussel, and about 11% of those are going to survive to become adult mussels. And
wow.
so within a few generations, one mussel will turn into billions of mussels.
And you said their reproductive cycle is how long typically?
So it's as long as the water is about above 12 degrees Celsius, and they can either, depending on their conditions, they can either release a huge volume of eggs all at once, like a million, or they can do short bursts of 20 and 40,000 at a time every few weeks.
Mm,
And so they're really bred, or they've really evolved to survive through putting out a massive amounts of offspring. And so
yeah.
in their native environment, they do that, and they know most of them are going to get consumed, and so that's kind of their survival strategy: put out lots of offspring and hope that a few survive. Whereas here, they put out a ton of offspring and way more survive, and yeah, there's just no population check on them.
Right. And that temperature for the water, is there like, I mean, we get proper winter here. Does the winter kill them or do they just hibernate?
They essentially hibernate. I don't
Mhm.
know if it's really called hibernation, but they don't reproduce through the winter.
Right.
But they can survive. They basically would have to be frozen solid for like several hours. And so if you've got them in really shallow lakes where the lake is freezing, then that top layer might freeze. But they've been found down as deep as 500 feet in the Great Lakes. And
Wow.
so most of them are kind of within the first 10 meters of depth, but they can survive much deeper than that. And so you think like it's the same as how fish survive over the winter.
Yeah.
They go into the slightly deeper water. We don't get a lot of lakes that freeze more than 3 or 4 feet even in Arctic, right?
Yeah.
Um, so we don't have the cold conditions to eliminate them, and we also don't have the hot conditions. So I think the top range is about 33, 35 degrees. And
Mhm.
we do hit some of those temperatures on the surface of the lakes, but again, down in the deeper areas, they're going to be able to survive that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So there's not a natural seasonal effect that's going to get rid of them. Obviously, I mean, if they're not freezing to death in Ontario and they've had them for years, then their BC is a lot milder than Ontario.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's other water chemistry things that can limit them. So they need a certain amount of calcium. They can't survive in a certain amount of salt.
Mm,
There are things like that. But what you can do is we've created the most up-to-date chemistry table, and we put out a guide that's available on OBWB, Okanagan Basin Water Board, obwb.ca, and it's called Mussel Vulnerability Assessment Guide. It's for infrastructure.
mm,
But what you can do is on page 19 of that guide, there's a table of water quality information. And if people want to go to that, they can take local water samples or find out what water samples are available and compare their lake's chemistry to that page. Um,
right. So
yeah,
this is
yeah.
your guys' website here, and it kind of gives an overview of what the OBWB does, and then obviously in the menu up top here, it gives all of these different tools. And so I'd assume that would be in your tools here somewhere.
Yeah, it should be in our library. Might be quicker to just Google mussel vulnerability assessment. Oh, there's library. Okay,
Yeah,
let's see. There we go. First link.
nice. And so this
Yes.
would be useful for what, like boats, marinas, yachts, all that kind of stuff?
It's for infrastructure, so more for water intake facilities. If you've
Okay.
got, retaining walls, bridges, marinas, certainly, things like that. What we tried to do is go through and think through what all of the what the steps would be if you want to understand the risk that mussels pose to these facilities,
Mm-hmm.
the costs that would be involved if they get into your utilities water system,
Right.
and we've provided a whole menu of options for potential ways to control them.
Yeah.
Um, so again, that's control within a system like a water filtration plant, not control within a water body.
Mm-hmm.
When we talk about control within a water body, there are some chemicals and things that have been used in the States, but mostly unsuccessfully. Yeah, so I think if you scroll down, I think it's page 19 where that table of information is. Um, yeah, so the chemicals haven't been used that successfully, especially in large water bodies. There it is right there. So we know that, for example, in the lakes here in the Okanagan, none of the chemicals are going to work. By the time the mussels are introduced to a water body and discovered in a water body, it's pretty much already too late. The horse has left the stables saying is really true with invasive mussels.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, that is scary. So I don't want to always say that it's doom and gloom, but is there anything that we can do about these things other than hopefully getting people to check their boats? Like the average person, if you could have them do everybody to do anything right now that would help the scenario, what would that be?
Really spreading awareness, and if you've got family out in Ontario who's bringing a boat for the summer, let them know they can rent a boat here, or maybe you'll buy a boat and let them use it or something.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Really, like we need to people to understand the level of risk because we talk a lot about invasive species and we don't want any here, but some are worse than others. And
Mhm.
this is one of like the worst ones. It's considered the species of most risk for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, for example. So you've got federal governments who recognize that this is a threat beyond what most other species pose.
Yeah.
And not every lake is vulnerable, but our lakes here that are in the interior, and most of our lakes in most regions of BC. And then think about the effects, like it'll affect recreation, of course, but also hydropower. So your bills are going to go up and those sorts of things.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing I suggest, as partly as an awareness raising thing, but also to get some action happening, is go to that link that we just visited and grab it and send it to your local water utility and say, hey, have you prepared your system for this? And it
Mhm.
should get them thinking about it, and it might save you some money as a you know ratepayer in the long run.
Well, yeah, I mean, the infrastructure risk, in some of those photos and pictures, if anybody Googles, mussels attached to infrastructure, they fill those pipes and then all of a sudden you don't have water, you don't have electricity or catastrophic things happen when you suddenly don't have nice, clean, running, clear water through your system. So we all end up paying for that at the end of the day, which is why that phrase, if you drink water or pay taxes, you should be interested in this, I think is very pertinent for people to understand.
Yeah, for sure. And I understand, like, even if we can keep them out of our water systems, you still end up with some residual taste and smell. I didn't mention smell, but of course the smell of our lakes will change. It'll smell
Hmm.
more like being on the ocean and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's scary. I know that there's not a lot of direct actions, but the longer we can keep them out as well, the more potential solutions there would be to find, right? People have been working on this for a long time, and there are new things that come out. We may never get to a point of eradication. Hopefully, we can figure something out, but we need to delay these certainly as long as possible, if not forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know when they had that discovery in Idaho that they took some pretty drastic measures to eliminate. And I don't know if there's a follow-up that happens with that, but maybe if you want to touch on what was discovered there and how they treated it, and then today, if we know if they are mussel free because of that treatment.
So I think it was about September 18th last year, they discovered water samples full of the larval mussels. And they sent some divers into the area, and they were able to find one adult mussel attached, in like 18 feet of water. It was really amazing that they found that mussel.
I was gonna say, I mean, that those are some good eyeballs. If you're if you're in
Yeah,
water and you're able to find one adult that's like this big.
that's right. It's kind of like looking for a contact lens, but in a
Yeah.
flowing river, right?
Yeah.
So it was quite amazing. And Idaho had a plan prepared, and it involved using a chemical called copper chelate. And copper is toxic to almost, to most forms of life in various concentrations.
Mhm.
And they dumped, I can't remember exactly, it was over 100,000 liters of this copper chelate into a section of the Snake River, and it should have killed the mussels, um, including any native mussels that were in the river. It killed about 6 to 7 tons of fish. It
Mm.
killed the entire population of sturgeon that were in that section of river, and some of those were 35-year-old, 8 foot long sturgeon that were washing up. It killed, some amphibians and other things, generally not mammals or birds,
Hmm.
but it had a profound effect in that stretch of river, and that was considered better than potentially letting the mussels survive and get downstream.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, there's no guarantee that it worked. And like I mentioned, we've seen in Lake Winnipeg and in various other lakes where they've used similar chemicals, and they've managed to poison the area that they targeted, but the mussels had already spread beyond there. And that's, I think, the fear in Idaho. And so the mussels, like I mentioned earlier, don't start breeding until about 12 degrees water temperature. And
Mhm.
the state of Idaho massively upped their budget for testing, and they spread out the sections of river that they're testing in. Um, but we would expect it to take potentially years for them to see new mussels form. And so I've talked a lot about the reproduction rates of zebra mussels. The quagga mussels are the other one. They don't reproduce quite as quickly, um, but when they do get into a water system, they filter a little bit more. They can survive a wider range of temperatures. They're even worse than zebra mussels. They take
Mm.
longer to establish that peak population, but
Mhm.
in some of the Great Lakes, they've actually displaced zebra mussels as the dominant invasive species.
Oh,
And
wow.
so what they found in the Snake River was quagga mussels, which means it will likely take even longer for the samples to come back positive. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but realistically, I think that um, in the next year or two, we'll likely see some positive samples coming because
Mm.
they had so many positive samples that there's likely a larger adult population somewhere in the Snake River.
Wow.
Um, and it might just not have gotten treated. So long term, once a jurisdiction has a finding of invasive mussels, it takes 5 years of consecutive mussel-free samples before they can declare that area mussel-free again.
Mm.
So we really just have to treat Idaho and the Snake River as a high-risk area for, at least the next 4 summers after this one,
Mhm.
before we can say that either the population just didn't survive for whatever reason or that that chemical treatment was effective.
And so with that being maybe one of the closer direct water bodies that feeds into our Columbia Basin, um, are there any precautionary elements or steps that can be taken to prevent that? I mean, I know you can't just, put a dam in there somewhere and stop all the water from coming through. Um, but what do we do in BC to help prevent that from happening?
So
Yes.
yeah, fortunately, they're downstream from BC. So
Mm.
even though the snake kind of comes northwest toward Washington and it goes into Washington State, into the Columbia, um, we just need to treat any boats coming, any watercraft coming from those areas as high risk. So if you are coming from that area, the questions and the things, the steps you're going to have to take when you get stopped at the border or when you bring your boat back in, they're going to be a little more intensive than if you're coming from, say Alberta or Saskatchewan, where we know there's no mussels yet.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to be treated as a high-risk watercraft if you come out of the Snake River, and potentially in the next few years, if they find these things further down the Columbia, there will be watercraft inspections um, within jurisdictions. So right now we've got inspections at the border of BC, but you can imagine if these things are discovered in one watershed and not in others, now we're going to have internal controls. So one way that this is accomplished in some of the states, in Utah, for example, is if you're coming out of an infested water body, you have to be decontaminated and potentially have a quarantine period before you go into another water body. So the
How
best
do
behavior,
they enforce that?
how do they enforce it? Right at the boat launch. So
Oh, okay.
again, in Lake Mead in Nevada, you can't pull your boat out of Lake Mead without going past an inspection station.
Nice.
And I think the rule there is like if you were in the lake for more than 3 days or something, then you have to have a decontamination.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
there are different ways that it's enforced at different water bodies, but the ones in Utah, you can't leave the water body without a decontamination. And then as for quarantines, I know in BC, they basically use like a locking twist tie that attaches your boat to your trailer. It's
Mm.
not, anybody could come and clip it off or whatever, but if you if you take it off, then after 30 days, the conservation officers are going to know that you took it off, because at the end of your quarantine period, you have to physically report, or they'll come to your house or whatever, but you have to physically show a conservation officer that that tag is still in place
Oh,
and
wow.
hasn't been tampered with.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the ankle monitor,
Yeah.
if you're let out of jail, your ankle monitor, like you can misbehave and try and take it off, but they're going to find you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and they do have the power to seize boats and things like that. So you really don't
Hmm.
want to play around with those things.
So the
Not that I,
decontam sorry.
sorry, no, go ahead.
I was gonna say the decontamination is nothing extraordinarily intense and the quarantine is 30 days. Like the decontamination is hot water, right?
Yeah, basically they're going to pressure wash your boat for you, so it's kind of like a free cleaning. And they'll hook up some special equipment to your intakes and that sort of thing, and just flush your system with hot water. They're very careful; they won't do any damage to the watercraft. If you got something like a big complicated yacht or whatever, then you might have to go to your marina and have them help the decontamination.
Mhm.
Um, if you want to avoid all of that, just don't travel to infested areas. We've
Yeah.
still got a lot of lakes in the Pacific Northwest that are uninfested, and one of the proposals we're making that hasn't quite made it public yet, but we're proposing to create a Western Canada invasive mussel free zone with
Mm.
Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC working together, so that if you're within those areas, you can kind of get a quick pass and say, hey, I'm not a high risk boat. I didn't leave the area.
Mhm.
Um, and we're also trying to get the government to consider empowering marinas, like certifying inspectors, so that if you come back into the province and you don't hit one of those open inspection stations, you
Mhm.
can go to your local marina and they'll do the same inspection and decontamination for you. Uh,
Yeah.
that that might not be free, but at least you can, kind of guarantee that you're doing the right thing, and you're not going to introduce mussels into our water.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to touch on that. You just brought up the inspection stations again here in BC. So they are mandatory when open, and they're permanent, but that's maybe you want to touch on what that actually means for BC and maybe, if people feel so inspired by it, they can write a letter or call their local politicians and make a suggestion that we actually do something a little bit more than what's currently in place.
That's a great point. So the inspection stations that we have in BC and in Alberta are seasonal. They're judged basically on that water temperature and on when most watercraft are going to be coming in, most tourism is coming in, but they're seasonal, and they're not 24/7. And so you might come in, even the one in Golden, which is on the Trans Canada, is supposed to be, staffed, I think 24 hours a day, 7 days a week through the season. But occasionally you'll come through there, and the station will be closed for whatever reason, staffing or other reasons.
Mhm.
Um, and so we've been calling on the government for a number of years to make inspections mandatory, whether or not you go past one of those stations. As I mentioned before, if you pass an open station, you are legally required to stop with any sort of watercraft, not just a powered watercraft. If you've got a kayak or a stand-up paddleboard or anything like that, stop and just go through the process. The average inspection is really just a couple questions and might take a minute to 3 minutes. So
Mhm.
it's not a lot of time out of your travels.
Yeah.
Um, but if you don't pass one of those open inspection stations, currently there's no legal requirement to get your boat inspected.
Yeah.
And
Which is
so,
crazy.
yeah, we'd really like to see, even with the province maintaining those inspection stations at the roadside, if they empower marinas and other partners, maybe environmental contractors and whatnot, to do certified inspections and decontaminations, then it's a second layer of defense, and you can tell people that you must get inspected. And
Mhm.
then, if you come in at night or on a different route or whatever, you don't have to try and hit one of the open inspection stations. You can just do the responsible thing and go to the marina that's right beside the boat launch that you're going to be using
Yeah.
and say, hey, I just came in from out of province and I want an inspection.
Yeah.
And hopefully they could create some sort of a passport for the mussel free region if they create it,
Mhm.
and make things really quick and simple for people, while protecting our waters. That ultimately, that's why people come to the Okanagan, come to BC, is to use our lakes and our beautiful backcountry. So we want to protect
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and hopefully, I mean, I hate to be the pessimist in the room, but um, the way that it stands right now, it's based on the good graces of people wanting to be responsible citizens. But in the back of my mind, I keep thinking, okay, well, if you're from Ontario and you're only here once and you're like, I don't care, then that one person could literally destroy the water systems in our area by bringing in one or two little baby mussels or a handful of them, a few thousand of them in a cup of water that they didn't clean off their boat. Um, so it would be really nice, sad that we have to enforce it as through a legal you have to. But I think probably necessary because the good grace of just doing the responsible and correct thing often isn't enough when it's inconvenient or costs money or whatever.
That's right. And there are some bad actors, but I think the majority of people want to do the right thing, but they might not even know about it. So we do
Hmm.
see watercraft owners coming from infested regions that have just been infested so long that they don't treat it like a real issue.
Yeah.
So you can imagine these things were introduced to the Great Lakes in 1988. You've got people who, they haven't even been alive that long, and they're pulling their boats across the country, and
Hmm.
so the whole time they've grown up with these things being natural. I heard a story about a contractor coming into Alberta recently, towing a barge to do some work in an irrigation system. And they were aware of the mussel problem and they had been apparently certified. And I think like they just didn't realize that they were going from an infested to a non-infested region, you know.
Yeah, I
So
don't wanna pick on Ontario there, but anyone coming from an infested water, and that's why I was asking if, if there are signs or if there's a map somewhere online that people can look and see, okay, which of the lakes are considered infested so that you at least know because, at one of the presentations that you guys had given, there was a stat thrown out about X amount of people not even being aware that the testing stations exist, let alone wanting and being able to go to them. If you just don't know they exist, then how could you even go?
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of just lack of information, lack of understanding. So, yeah, I don't want to pick on Ontario either, but that's where the majority of the infested boats are coming from. That's the
Mhm.
jurisdiction that has been infested for a long time.
Yeah.
Now we need to be worried about Manitoba as well. So, there are maps online. They're pretty easy to find. The U.S. Geologic Survey, USGS site, if you were to type in USGS invasive mussels, they've got a ton of information and interactive maps that show the spread of the mussels from the Great Lakes across North America since 1988.
Mhm.
So it's pretty easy to find the information, but you have to know to look for it as well. You have to know
Yeah.
that it's an issue.
Yeah.
And like I said off the bat, most people kind of get that there's this thing out there. They see billboards, or they see, or they hear the "Don't Move a Mussel" from the Okanagan Basin Water Board.
Mm-hmm.
But until you really understand, if you get a 10-minute video presentation on all these effects, people are scared after.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to affect our agriculture too. Like, it affects almost every aspect of our life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, we just need to spread the word and try and get people to be aware to not bring these watercraft in.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, James, what got you into conservation in the first place? How did you end up at the Okanagan Basin Water Board?
Well, through university, I stumbled onto some really passionate professors in both political science and geography in my undergrad. But I had one professor in particular who was kind of teaching the history of environmental thought and things like that. And during one of the classes, we had a guest speaker come from the Okanagan Basin Water Board, and that was Anna Warwick Sears, who's my boss and mentor.
Mm,
And so after her presentation, I was born and raised in Kelowna, and I had never heard of the Okanagan Basin Water Board. And my other major was political science, so I got thinking about the governance and all that sort of stuff. So I was introduced to the organization through university, and when a job became available, I applied for it. Um, and I've been here, almost 13 years now.
oh, wow.
Um, one of my most profound experiences coming out of university, we're all kind of depressed about environment and conservation issues and things like that. And one of the first meetings at the water board was to attend what's called the Okanagan Water Stewardship Council.
Mm,
And this is a monthly meeting of every sector of society that has to do with water. You've got every level of government, First Nations representatives, um, academia, contractors, forestry companies, associations for agriculture, about 35 organizations, and they come and sit around the table every month and discuss the issues and interact with each other and try and tackle any conflicts that are coming up. And so, coming out of that kind of pessimistic environment of the university and seeing people who'd been working on water issues for decades and what could be very conflicting interests with very little conflict because the people are there talking to each other and have established relationships. It just made me aware of the really tremendous work that people have been doing for decades
mhm.
and how passionate they are and how willing to collaborate they are. And so it just filled me with a great sense of optimism from that sense of pessimism.
Yeah,
And I actually had the privilege of going back 2 years ago and co-instructing that same course. So I
nice.
went from being a student to the instructor, and now I was able to share that same experience with the students, especially as young people now are dealing with so much environmental depression and climate change depression and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's not a great outlook when you consider all of the diseases that are affecting species across the spectrum, from deer to bats to our local aquatic and fish and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice that the people behind the scenes, we've had um, Kate on the show who deals with CWD stuff as well. uh, you guys are the right people for the job. You're very optimistic. You present information in a great way that isn't overly depressing or life sucking out of the hopes and the dreams, and that there are steps and things to be done to help prevent or at least curtail for as long as possible the potential inevitable outcomes.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Um, how can people get involved if they wanted to participate in any way, shape, or form to help combat these things? What are ways that they can get involved either with the Okanagan Basin Water Board, which I'll put the website link down below if people want to check out what you guys do specifically or different projects you're working on. But what would you recommend is the best way for people to get involved?
I think that there are a lot of organizations out there that could really use, people's enthusiasm. If you have extra time, or even if you want to do donations, you mentioned BC Wildlife Federation. They do a tremendous amount of work with all sorts of things. Wetland restoration being one of the top ones that has been a really outstanding program in the last few years, and they also do great advocacy work and things like that. From an invasive species perspective, there are invasive species societies throughout the province. Here in the Okanagan, we work with the Okanagan and Similkameen Invasive Species Society, and they're the ones who are out there doing outreach at boat launches, as well as dealing with all other invasive species, terrestrial or aquatic. So look for your local invasive species society and see if you can help, or even just donate $5 or whatever you can.
Mm-hmm.
There's the Invasive Species Council of BC also does a lot of tremendous work, and they're set up as well as like a nonprofit. So societies like that, your local, fish and game club, having speakers come in to talk to them,
Mm-hmm.
any group that you're involved with, bringing the education forward to them,
Yeah.
whether it's having a live speaker or directing people to video links or whatnot, is really helpful. And then, just I'd encourage people to even act on their own if you think that there's something going on with water or with the environment. Don't hesitate to phone, report all poachers and polluters if you see something out there. I
Yep.
know BCWF and the Conservation Officers Service developed a RAP app a few years ago that I've used while I've been out hunting to report, garbage dumps in the woods and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's almost no end of opportunities to volunteer and get involved.
Yeah, you just made me think of it when you said that. So, Kane with the Okanagan Forest Task Force, which is a local group that goes out and cleans up all the garbage out of the woods. So people, for some reason, think it's a good idea to just go dump their crap in the woods, or just go out for a camp and then they just leave all of their garbage there and don't take it with them. But anyways, Kane and the OFTF have also developed an app specifically for dump sites. So if you happen to be out in the woods and you come across a huge dump site, they have an app that will, even offline, will save your coordinates and location and upload it to the app. And then the crew that does all of those big cleanups are able to locate, go, and address those scenarios. So that's another useful app, not related to disease, but related to backcountry cleanup and keeping the woods nice and clean and wild the way that we like them.
Yeah, Kane Blake is a real powerhouse. He's done a tremendous amount of work, for the benefit of our community, and
Mm-hmm.
a real shout out to him. And you think about that in terms of downstream effects on water quality, like the type of stuff they're cleaning up, whether it's metals or construction waste or just household waste, will get into our water systems. And so
Oh, yeah.
they're really doing a lot for source protection, not just keeping the backcountry beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
but preventing a lot of the pollution. And I think also, working with enforcement agencies to try and stop this type of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it also reminds me, if you're out in the backcountry, one of the main sources of water pollution can be using decommissioned forestry roads, which can cause erosion, or fording your vehicle through running water, things like that. So
Yeah.
I'm out in the backcountry as often as I can, particularly during hunting season, and
Yeah.
I would just encourage people to think about where that water is going to end up, because, if you're in your community watershed, then chances are the water you're driving through is going to end up at your intake at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think people necessarily always think about the A to Z process, but it's good to have these reminders and educational opportunities to realize that it all connects and impacts each other.
Mhm.
Before we move on to a wrap up, I have a series of questions there. I did want to touch briefly on another disease that's affecting our water populations, and that's whirling disease. So I was hoping that you could maybe touch on what it is and the impact, and then any solutions or things that people could be doing to help address that. And I'll just pull up a picture of it while you're doing that.
Yeah, I'm not as much of an expert on whirling disease, but I know that it is a parasite that affects fish, and it basically contorts and twists their body, prevents them from growing, and can completely devastate entire populations. So you can see that these do not look like normal fish.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it was just recently found in BC for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And the important thing is that the same behaviors that will stop mussels from spreading will also stop whirling disease from spreading. So we still need to be cleaning, draining, and drying our watercraft.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is just, devastating for fish, and really threatens a lot of populations. But we just need to stop it from going between water bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, if people are interested, I can this was from the Utah Division of Wildlife, but I can post this link in the show notes as well. There's lots of information through the BC government too, but this picture kind of accurately depicts it. It's a parasitic disease that affects the fish and contorts their spines and their bodies and then makes them basically swim in a circle, hence why it's called the whirling disease. So we'll definitely link that in the show notes too, so that people can read a bit more about that and understand that it's not just invasive mussels that we need to be worried about. It's also things that can affect the fish species that we love to see and eat and fish and all of that as well.
There's also a lesson here in, public action. So I mentioned that the requirement to pull your drain plug from your watercraft was only introduced in July. We've been
Mhm.
calling for that legislation or regulations for at least 5 years, I think longer. And with zebra and quagga mussels being kind of an external threat, there wasn't the immediate need seen by the government to introduce that legislation or regulations.
Mhm.
Once whirling disease was detected within our jurisdiction, it only took a matter of, I think, maybe 6 weeks or a little longer to introduce from the chief veterinarian an order that everyone must remove their drain plug. And so it's just another example of how prevention is really hard to accomplish from a public policy perspective,
Mhm.
because people are like, oh, that threat's far away, it's
Yeah,
not here
it's
yet,
over
why
there.
are we doing it?
Yeah.
Right. And yet once something is present, which in some cases is already too late to deal with, now
Mhm.
all of a sudden there's funding for it, there's action, there's regulations, there's lots of education and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
We need to do a better job as a society, and our leaders need to do a better job of recognizing the whole ounce of prevention being worth a pound of cure argument. you
Yeah.
know it takes such a minimal investment to do way more to prevent these things than it does once they're here to try and clean them up. And we still have a mindset as a society that, where are my tax dollars going to, and not realizing. And the same, from a water perspective, the same goes for flood prevention and infrastructure maintenance, and the same
Yeah.
for source
Fire
water protection in the
prevention.
forest. That's right. Yeah, fire
Yeah.
prevention. Like, there's a whole lot of things we can do better. The problem is, if you don't get to that disaster point, people will never recognize, like, oh, the money prevented a disaster because it never happened. So they don't know that the
Mhm.
money was worth it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a tough one. There's so many preventative actions that need to be taken that thankfully organizations like yourself, BCWF, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, which I'm part of, um, are taking those proactive steps to be the conservationists, to be the voice for not having those things happen, even though, you don't see where your dollars go to because you don't see the mitigation effect that happens because, like you said, it never, hopefully the disaster never happens. But thankfully we have organizations like that that are putting their voices forward on behalf of people who just don't even know that that needs to be happening because I feel like if people don't see it, then it's out of sight, out of mind. And it's those that see or take the time to research and go to other places where those disasters or things are happening that can say, hey, we don't want this here, so let's do the preventative steps. So I'm very grateful for people like you who are doing the good work of spreading the word and doing the laborious stuff of writing letters and having meetings and talking to politicians to try and get some actual public policy and implemented change happening.
Mhm. Yeah, I've been trying to think of a good analogy for the whole prevention thing, and all I've kind of thought of so far is, we all do our maintenance on our cars, especially if you get a new car, your warranty will run out if you don't do your maintenance. Like,
Yeah.
very few people go so long without an oil change that it leads to their engine breaking down, right?
Hmm.
And it's kind of the same thing. Like, we just need to continue to do those maintenance and prevention practices to prevent the engine from breaking down and becoming a much more expensive problem.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. James, thank you so much for being on the show today. I do have a few wrap up questions that are somewhat rapid fire, so we'll send those over to you now. Um, what would be your this one's less rapid fire, but
Okay.
what would be your 2 minutes or less recommendation to anyone that's new to either hunting or the conservation world or angling? What do you wish you knew when you started that you know now?
Ooh, that's a good one. So from a hunting perspective, I'd say don't skimp on a good rifle and optics or on your equipment. Right, get something decent, not bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
And if you can find a good mentor who you trust, and go out with someone who's willing to take you there. I've had so many people who are willing to take me and show me the ropes.
Hmm.
It's completely invaluable. And I just wish I had gotten out a little bit sooner, but I'm really proud of the fact that I'm now going out and taking my kids with me, because it's not something that I experienced as a young person. So,
Yeah.
yeah, let's pass it on to the next generation.
Cool. Very cool. What was the first animal that you ever harvested in your hunting career so far?
Grouse.
Nice. Me too.
Yeah,
Me too.
that was more. I did have a friend who took me out for a little while when I was about 12, and so I got a 410 and was able to harvest a couple of grouse. But when I fully took on hunting as an adult, I've been fortunate to usually bring home at least a white-tailed doe per season. So
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I'm hoping that's my goal this year. At least something bigger than a grouse.
yeah, that's right.
What's your favorite either hunting or conservation resource, whether that's a podcast, a book, a forum, anything like that?
I really like American Buffalo by Stephen Ranella.
Mm,
He's a hunter and a conservationist, and he tells a story about winning a buffalo lottery.
mhm,
And he's such a good storyteller. He narrates it on his audiobook, and it's about this epic hunting trip he does to I think it's in Alaska, and it
mhm.
deals with conservation, First Nation issues. So it's about the hunt, but it also details the entire history of bison, buffalo in the United States and Canada.
Cool. Yeah, I hadn't heard that one before, so I'll have to look that one up. What is your favorite outdoors snack? What do you take with you into the woods?
Ooh, probably beef jerky.
Yeah, that's classic.
Yeah, easy to
Um,
get, easy to enjoy.
yeah, yeah, and not super loud for the most part.
Yeah, that's right.
Are you a double socks or a one layer of socks kind of guy?
Ooh, that's good. Back in the army, I was a double layer of socks guy, because you're marching so much and so long, carrying heavy weight. You needed it for the blister protection.
Oh,
But now I've just got a real good pair of like a medium weight Cabela's wool hunting sock, and I find that works really well with my more comfortable than combat boots.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Do you have any sort of lucky item that you take hunting with you?
No, no,
No, no lucky charms, no rabbit's foot
no,
keychain.
no. Maybe that's what I need.
Yeah, maybe that's what I've been missing all this time. And what's the one absolute essential item that you have to have on every outdoor adventure? Could not leave home without it.
Oh, this is a sucky answer, but my Subaru Outback. I recently switched from Chevy Silverado, which I absolutely loved, and I had everything done to it that I wanted, but I was spending about 90% of my time in the city going back and forth to work, and the truck I loved it, but I recently went to a Subaru Outback Wilderness Edition, and I lifted it a little bit and thrown a winch on there, and I can still attach the. I've got this. Maybe this is the item. I've got a trailer hitch hoist that you
Mm.
can put a gambrel on the top of, so it
Oh, wow.
breaks down. You can keep it in your trunk or in your truck box, and then when you get the animal, you don't have to go look around for a skinning rack or anything like that. You just
Yeah,
hoist it right up,
that's
and then
sweet.
it can also it pivots so you can put the animal right into your truck. So or
Oh, wow.
or in this case, in the back of your Subaru Outback,
Yeah.
if your wife lets you do that sort of thing.
Hey, man, that's what tarps are made for. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. James, any last comments that you'd like to share or things I didn't ask you that I should have?
The other website I didn't mention is don'tmoveamussel.ca, so
Mm,
people can go there for a lot more information. It was put together by my colleague Corrine Jackson, who's our communications director, and over more than 10 years, she's done a tremendous amount of work to get that website and spread the word. We
hmm
have the highest public awareness of this issue anywhere in BC in the Okanagan, and that's just directly due to her work.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I'll put links to some of the key websites down below in the show notes so that if people are interested, that they can go and take a look and connect that way. And I'll also have your contact information down there. So if people have questions or they want to reach out, volunteer, be at one of the boat docks, handing out little information flyers or talking to people, that they can reach out and get in touch with you guys at the Okanagan Basin Water Board as well.
Great.
Amazing. Thank you, James, so very much.
Thanks again for having me, Justina.
Thanks for tuning in today to watch or listen, and make sure to hit that like or subscribe button to follow along wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions, comments, or reviews, please drop them down below. I will read them and I will get back to you. Or you can reach me at questions@entrypointhunting.com. If you know an expert or someone who offers great advice or is just growing rapidly in the field of hunting, angling, or conservation, please send them my way. I would love to reach out and connect with them. And until next time, friends, stay hungry.